There's been growing concern over the impact Donald Trump's presidency could have on funding for South African non-profit organizations. In a Daily Maverick article, Shelagh Gastrow has examined the issue. She joins us now via Skype to discuss this in a little more detail. Shelagh, good evening to you. Thank you very much for your time. Are we starting to see any effect the Donald Trump presidency is having on NGOs or aid funding locally?
I don't think there's any clarity at the moment. Certainly there are discussions in Washington about aid to Africa, and Trump does seem to be averse to funding countries that are critical of the US. And in addition, he has this policy of United States first. It's not exactly isolationist, but it's about putting his money back into the United States as a priority.
So we know that one program that's made a massive difference in the way we handle HIV and AIDS in South Africa has been the PEPFAR program, which came into being under George W. Bush. Does the US for now remain committed to this program?
It appears that Trump is committed to issues around HIV and AIDS, and there hasn't been any suggestion at this stage that there would be cuts in the PEPFAR funding. However, the 30% cut that he's looking at for foreign aid could have other ramifications for Africa.
Just talk us through some of those.
I think some of the cuts may be through the United Nations, which means some of the peacekeeping forces that are funded with American money or with Americans there may be quite seriously affected. And then there are other more minor American funds to the continent in general, which give small grants to non-profit organizations, and that may well be cut.
You've also picked up, particularly with regard to HIV and AIDS, a certain conservatism where the Trump presidency would rather fund prevention programs than antiretroviral programs. I mean, is that going to become a problem in the years to come?
Well, this is difficult to predict, but certainly the kind of things that is happening under the Trump presidency around reproductive rights, for example, the cutting of funding to Planned Parenthood, the issues around abortion that are emerging. So there may be a kind of moral issue around some of the preventive programs, providing condoms, for example, and mainly focusing on abstinence instead. I really can't say whether there'd be cuts in treatment, funds for treatment. I think that would be unlikely. But I certainly think there'll be a change in a kind of moral tone around how NGOs here, what kind of things they can fund.
Shelagh, what would happen to local programs if US funding were reduced or withdrawn?
I think there would be a major impact, particularly in the HIV and AIDS sectors. US funding to other sectors is very minor. Apparently, from what I've read, the budget for funding in South Africa was just over $260 million this year, of which about 250 something was for health. So there was really only about $10 million allocated to other undefined projects. So I don't think it would have such a major impact, but the issue of the Trump presidency is having an effect on private philanthropy in the US, and they also give substantially to social justice organizations in South Africa. And what is happening there is private philanthropy. Some of the big foundations are looking at, do they have to turn back to look at issues in the United States rather than fund those abroad?
Shelagh Gastrow from Gastrow Block, thanks very much for talking to us. Of course, we'll have to see how that story develops.